May 25, 1941, North Atlantic. The surface was tranquil, but within the steel hull of German U-557, every crewman held his breath. A solitary noise had cut through the vessel, artificial, metallic, intentional, ping. It reverberated inside the submarine like a death knell. A young midshipman, Herbert Werner, clutched the periscope handles, paralyzed. It wasn't terror of the surface. It was terror of the unfamiliar. That noise should not have been possible. Their training insisted a submerged U-boat was invulnerable, invisible, quiet as death. But it came again. Ping. The sound pulsed through the partitions, the conduits, into their very bones. Everyone aboard understood immediately. The foe could detect them underwater. Werner would later record that in that instant, it seemed the sea itself had turned on them. For years, German U-boats had roamed the Atlantic almost without opposition, dipping below the surface to attack and disappear. This noise, however, this chilling, exact signal, was the first volley of a different type of combat. A lethal new thing had roused in the Allied weaponry. Sonar. The unseen barrier that had shielded U-boats from the war's start had just been broken. In the initial years of World War II, Germany's U-boat fleet dominated the Atlantic as wolves hunt sheep. The world knew it as the first happy time. Dozens of British supply vessels were sunk weekly, torpedoed in the black of night. Convoys dispersed. Merchant mariners dreaded the periscope above all tempests. And beneath the waves, the men of the Kriegsmarine felt they were invulnerable. U-boat crews were taught to see the ocean as armor, not a hazard. Silent running was their doctrine. Dive, kill the engines, float in the depths, and you turned into a phantom. Hydrophones, the dated World War I underwater listening gear, could only pick up noisy propellers or engines. But a U-boat on electric power was almost quiet, almost unseen. They had total faith in this. German naval trainers assured every crew, "Once submerged, no foe can locate you unless you reveal yourself." This conviction became doctrine on U-boats. It molded their strategy, their self-assurance, their very being. They were the sea's predators, the invisible menace. Radio operator Wolfgang Hirschfeld on U-1009 later noted in his journal, "We thought we were shadows under the water. The British hunted without seeing while we slid by them. We believed nothing could harm us once submerged." Yet that conviction, that belief in their invisibility, rested on a falsehood they had yet to discover. In hidden laboratories far from the fighting, Allied researchers were readying a thing that would pull every U-boat from the shadows. They had already begun constructing the device that would locate them. Sonar's history does not start in World War II. It began in hopelessness decades before, in the last year of the First World War. In 1917, German U-boats were choking British supply routes so well that London worried about collapse. In reaction, British and French researchers hurried to discover a method to see beneath the water. Their tests were basic, metal sheets and microphones dropped into the ocean. But one finding altered everything. Sound moves faster and further in water than in air. If the dark sea couldn't be pierced by light, perhaps it could by sound. By 1918, scientists constructed the first functional prototype of what would later be known as sonar. The British Navy called it ASDIC, a code name intended to hide its function. It sent out a sound pulse that rebounded off solid things and came back as an echo. Abruptly, submarines were not entirely unseen anymore. But the war finished before ASDIC could be fully developed. Money disappeared. Military commanders became indifferent, save for a handful of persistent engineers who continued working in seaside labs long after the conflict ended. Through the 1920s and 30s, these engineers improved the design. At the Royal Navy's anti-submarine school in Portland, codenamed HMS Osprey, they constructed a new version of ASDIC gear. Users were trained to find echoes and calculate range by timing the returning pulse. These first versions could only follow direction and distance, lacking depth, but it was a significant advance. By 1928, British destroyers were equipped with ASDIC. Admirals were so sure of it that by 1939, as World War II loomed, the Royal Navy thought it had completely fixed the submarine issue. They were profoundly mistaken. The technology was still basic, restricted to perfect conditions, shallow seas, and brief scanning periods. Worse, it possessed a critical defect the Royal Navy hadn't grasped, a blind area that stopped it from seeing at close quarters. So when German U-boats reappeared in the Atlantic in 1939, ASDIC was unprepared. It was soon to be outwitted, outflanked, and momentarily beaten. Initially, U-boat captains scoffed at Allied anti-submarine strategies. British destroyers patrolled the ocean confidently, haphazardly dropping depth charges and expending ordnance as German submarines silently escaped. ASDIC did not impede them much. The war's opening years were the wolf packs, but in 1941 a new term started spreading through U-boat crews, der Klang, the sound. It arrived suddenly, a sharp metallic tap resonating within the hull. Some likened it to rocks striking steel. Others claimed it was like a knock on the boat's exterior, as if death were asking to enter. It was ASDIC, though the Germans were not yet aware of it. Lieutenant Herbert Werner, only 22, on his first mission on U-557, would always remember his first encounter with it. His submarine had just risen to periscope depth, tracking a convoy south of Greenland when the sound started. Ping, ping, ping. The tempo accelerated. The noise became keener, nearer. Every man on board stiffened. It was then they realized. This was not a natural noise. It was not equipment. It was not a whale. It was not the current. It was a signal, aimed, deliberate, and searching for them. Werner later wrote, "Greater than in that moment, we knew we were not alone in the deep. Someone above could see us, though no human eye could reach us." The fear was not voiced, but it permeated the submarine like smoke. If the British had devised a method to find U-boats underwater, all of Germany's beliefs about submarine combat were false, and the predator was now the prey. The captain made no address. There wasn't time. Dive. 200 meters. Schnell. The electric motors whirred as U-557 descended deeper into the darkness. The crew operated like clockwork, shutting valves, securing bulkheads, switching off unnecessary power. Quiet was their final protection, but the noise pursued them. Ping, ping, ping. The British destroyer overhead had a fix and was approaching quickly. The hull moaned as water pressure bore down on the steel. Paint chipped. Moisture beaded on every pipe. In the tight control room, men were packed together, sweat streaming down them despite the frigid Atlantic outside. Then they heard the splashes. The crew tensed. 5 seconds, 10, 15, boom, boom, boom. The world exploded. Lights broke. Dials shook. Mugs and equipment were hurled through the air, smashing against metal. The concussion waves hit the submarine like a massive fist. Eardrums ruptured. Teeth shattered. The steel shrieked. A second barrage. Boom, boom, boom. The hull bent. It actually bent. Under the pressure. A pipe in the rear section ruptured, jetting seawater at high pressure. Damage teams scrambled in total darkness, using wedges and rubber to stop the flood. Nobody talked. Nobody wept. They simply worked. To stop was to die. The atmosphere grew thick with the stench of diesel, sweat, and terror. CO2 levels rose. Each breath became more difficult. Men started quietly tallying detonations, each one bringing them nearer to death. Hours went by. 7 hours of unceasing depth charges. The destroyer above never lost contact. Not for a moment. The pings continued. When the assault at last ceased, U-557 rose slowly, warily, like an injured beast. Men stumbled onto the conning tower, gulping fresh air. Some fell. Some were sick. Some just looked at the sky, mute, as if experiencing it anew. They had made it, but the legend of U-boat invulnerability had perished down below. Sonar had located them, but it had not destroyed them. Not yet. In 1941 and 1942, U-boat crews started to understand the behavior of this new enemy tech. The dread of that metallic ping was genuine, but so was German resourcefulness. Survival tactics evolved into an art form. They found the first flaw. Sonar possessed a blind spot. When a destroyer got within 200 yards of a U-boat, the transmitted sonar signal and its reflection merged. The system became ineffective at close range. U-boat captains named this the shadow zone. If their timing was precise, they could escape just as the destroyer passed above to release depth charges. A second flaw: thermal layers. In certain seas, temperature variations created unseen barriers underwater. As sound refracts upon hitting these temperature changes, U-boats could conceal themselves below them, as if disappearing behind a drape. Silent operation became paramount. A single drop tool could be lethal. A single shut hatch could betray their location. Veteran captains drilled their crews to move like phantoms. Engines off, battery power only. Slowest speed, no speech, no metal on metal. Even respiration was slowed to save air. Some crews learned to conceal themselves within the convoy, sliding between merchant vessels where engine sounds shielded them from sonar. Others exploited the turmoil of storms. Rough seas hampered sonar performance, to elude escorts and surface again to strike. Concurrently, German engineers developed superior passive listening gear instead of active sonar. The Gruppenhorstgerät, GHG, a highly sensitive hydrophone setup, could pick up convoys from 100 kilometers distant without emitting a sound. It was superb engineering, just aimed incorrectly. Germany still held that U-boats were for hunting, not hiding. They were unaware a technological tempest was approaching that would make concealment impossible. For a period, U-boats continued to command the Atlantic, but as they rejoiced in their maritime victories, a silent upheaval was starting in Allied labs. In September 1940, Britain took an exceptional step. It gave its most classified sonar technology to the United States, entirely free of charge. Not to gain influence, not for political reasons, but because Britain understood it might not endure without assistance. British engineers landed in Washington carrying boxes of ASDIC gear, plans, manuals, and even components taken directly from Royal Navy destroyers. They showed American scientists all they had discovered: how sonar signals distorted in seawater, how deceptive echoes tricked users, how U-boats concealed themselves under thermal layers. The United States did more than receive this information. They industrialized it. At the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, D.C., U.S. engineers re-engineered ASDIC for large-scale manufacturing. They gave it a new name: sonar, sound navigation and ranging. Britain had constructed sonar like a bespoke tool. America made it a mass-produced item, uniform, interchangeable, simple for training, and quick to manufacture. By early 1942, American shipyards were commissioning destroyer escorts with sonar at a rate faster than Germany could destroy them. Every new Allied warship bore the technology. Convoys that previously sailed with minimal escorts now traveled with entire hunter groups, all directed by sonar. The Atlantic was shifting. The pursuers were growing in number. And, for the first time, sonar was not merely a defensive instrument. It was transforming into a weapon. By 1943, sonar was not just a basic detection device. It had transformed into an accurate hunting tool. Three key advancements altered the Atlantic's equilibrium permanently. 1. Quicker scanning. No more blind areas. Initial sonar systems required manual rotation, slowly sweeping the sea in thin segments. By the time a U-boat was located, it had already escaped. Then came mechanized rotation. Electric motors took the place of hand cranks, letting sonar users scan wide ocean sectors in moments. U-boats could not slip by the search pattern's edges anymore. Once a sonar beam locked on, it remained on. 2. Detection at combat speed. Previously, ships needed to reduce speed to use sonar. Higher speed created more noise, which destroyed the sonar signal. German captains exploited this weakness to evade detection, but new, sleek steel sonar domes replaced the loud canvas covers. Now, Allied destroyers could speed at 20 knots, attack velocity, while holding a sonar fix. Abruptly, U-boats could no longer outpace detection. 3. Exact kill tracking, the Type 147 advance. Then the device arrived that altered it all, Type 147 ASDIC. Before, sonar only showed a U-boat's bearing and range, not its depth. U-boats could dive to evade depth charges, but Type 147 solved that. It followed submarines in 3 dimensions, direction, distance, and depth, all at once. U-boat commanders were stunned. Depth charges were now detonating precisely at their operational depth, 200 meters, 280, even 300. There was no guesswork, no random firing. It seemed the Allies possessed underwater X-ray sight. Herbert Werner, by then an experienced officer, stated it plainly. In 1941, we could break contact within an hour. In 1943, they could follow us for a day, and they always knew our depth. The era of disappearing into the abyss had ended. Sonar had changed from a mere warning to a sentence of death. There is a noise that only submariners genuinely dread. Not detonations, not enemy weapons. The sonar ping, not booming, not aggressive, just icy, persistent, and unavoidable. It signified that someone knew your precise location, and they were approaching. By 1943, U-boat veterans claimed the sound plagued them more than battle itself. It did not just endanger the body, it stalked the mind. Within a cornered submarine, time distorted and reason warped. The air grew stale. Each breath became more difficult. Carbon dioxide concentrations climbed. Hearts hammered. Heads spun. Lights were extinguished to conserve energy. Men sat waiting in blackness. Batteries depleted. Escape became unfeasible, yet the sonar continued. Ping, ping, ping. Wolfgang Hirschfeld recorded it in his journal. Greater than, the pinging never stops. It follows us like fate. We sit in the dark and wait for death to find us. Some men shook uncontrollably following prolonged attacks. Others stopped eating. Others murmured prayers in the blackness. A few just shattered, gazing empty-eyed at partitions, mentally broken. The anticipation was more terrible than the blasts. The pips provided the crew just enough time to envision their demise repeatedly. Each noise, each groan of the hull made them imagine overwhelming pressure and an inrush of dark ocean water. Depth charges took lives. Sonar annihilated spirits. For 3 years, the U-boats owned the Atlantic. But in May 1943, it all shifted. The Germans would recall it as Schwarzer Mai, Black May. Initially, there were indications, minor things. More escorts with convoys, more planes in the sky, more depth charge assaults enduring for hours, not minutes. U-boat command, however, still thought maritime victory was attainable. Then the massacre began. In only 3 weeks of May 1943, Admiral Dönitz dispatched 96 U-boats to the North Atlantic. 41 did not come back. Almost half the fleet disappeared into the ocean. Casualties skyrocketed. U-boats that previously bypassed convoy screens were now being found before they could strike. Wolf pack strategies disintegrated. Every U-boat appeared to be tracked, traced, and annihilated by unseen sonar beams. Convoy ONS-5 marked the turning point. Once a defenseless prey, it battled like a stronghold. Its escorts, equipped with new sonar and radar, hunted U-boats sequentially. The Germans anticipated a simple kill. Instead, they lost 6 U-boats in one engagement. Dönitz understood the reality. On May 24, 1943, he issued a stark command to all surviving U-boats. Withdraw from the North Atlantic. The admiral who had pledged to Germany that U-boats would force Britain's surrender by starvation had been compelled to fall back. Following that month, the U-boat conflict ceased to be a campaign. It was now a slaughter. The sea that had once shielded them had become their enemy. By late 1943, U-boat hunting was a science. The Allies did not depend on chance anymore. They constructed a total detection grid, a trapping method that tracked U-boats from the instant they departed port. It started with radar. U-boats used to surface after dark to charge batteries, thinking nightfall made them safe. But Allied planes, fitted with new centimetric radar, could now see a surfaced U-boat from miles off, even in complete blackness. Then came HF/DF radio tracking, dubbed Huff Duff. U-boats relied on radio for wolf-pack coordination, but each transmission gave away their location. Allied destroyers would triangulate these broadcasts and head straight for them. Next came sonar buoys, floating underwater microphones deployed from planes, which established mobile listening nets over the sea. A concealed U-boat could now be detected by sound before sight. And then the weapons. Hedgehog, the forward killer. Depth charges had a single defect. A vessel had to pass over the U-boat's projected location to release them, breaking sonar contact at the critical moment. So Britain developed Hedgehog, a spigot mortar that launched 24 contact-fused charges ahead of the vessel, all while keeping a steady sonar lock. If just one struck a submarine hull, the others followed. Not many endured a Hedgehog attack. Squid, the executioner. Then came Squid, a 3-barreled mortar. It did not estimate depth. It computed it from sonar data. An automatic fire control system matched the U-boat's velocity, course, and depth, and dropped the charges precisely on it. Kill ratio 25% per assault, 5 times better than depth charges. U-boat crews had no counter. Every evasion technique they had was being defeated by information, arithmetic, and technology. The sea was now charted by unseen sound waves. There was nowhere to flee. The predators now hunted with accuracy. Germany did not capitulate to sonar without resistance. Their engineers hurried to discover methods to fool, elude, or beat Allied detection. But every new countermeasure was unsuccessful, whether in its concept, in its application, or in combat. 1. Bubble decoys. Pielenwerfer. These gadgets discharged chemical bubbles intended to copy a submarine's sonar signature. Against novice operators, they were effective for a few minutes. But skilled sonar crews soon learned to identify the echo. Bubbles produced disorder, whereas submarine hulls gave back sharp, firm signals. Result? Largely ineffective. 2. Bold decoys. Fake submarines. The Germans next created Bold, a container that ascended slowly and hovered in the water, simulating a submarine contact. It was stationary, however, and sonar users soon understood that actual submarines do not remain motionless. Result? A decent diversion, but never saved crews for long. 3. Alberic, rubber-coated stealth U-boats. This was Germany's most daring test. Cover U-boats with sound-absorbing rubber tiles designed to swallow sonar pulses. The concept was decades ahead of its era. Modern submarines employ a similar technique. But wartime Germany could not perfect it. Tiles detached at depth. Seawater ate at the adhesive. The hull bent under pressure, ripping the coating. Result? Insufficient and too late. 4. The snorkel. False hope. In 1944, Germany introduced the snorkel, a breathing tube that let U-boats operate diesel engines while underwater. In theory, this concealed submarines from radar. But the snorkel caused agony. Diesel exhaust filled the boat. Valves snapped shut underwater, creating painful pressure changes. Waves inundated the air intake. And the worst part, Allied radar could still pick up the snorkel's head. Result? More misery, no safety, Each German innovation arrived too sluggishly, in insufficient quantities, or was beaten by the fast-advancing Allied sonar. This wasn't merely a technological failure. It was a failure against time. As Germany attempted to respond, the Allies were already far ahead. As the U-boat fleet was being decimated in the Atlantic, Germany took one last risk: a new type of submarine, quicker, more silent, more lethal. It was named the Type 21 Electroboot, and it appeared to be from a future time. In contrast to previous U-boats, which were essentially surface vessels with a temporary dive capability, the Type 21 was designed for underwater life. It featured a sleek hydrodynamic hull, no deck cannon, 3 times the battery power, and a sophisticated propulsion that could achieve 17 knots underwater, faster than some Allied destroyers. Internally, hydraulic reloading mechanisms let it launch 18 torpedoes in less than 20 minutes, 3 times faster than any U-boat in the conflict. Its motors were set on rubber mounts to dampen noise. The hull was covered in experimental sound-absorbent material. It even possessed a modern snorkel setup built to evade radar. In theory, it was frightful. If it had shown up in 1942, the Atlantic battle might have concluded much differently. But it did not. When the Type 21 first hit the water in early 1945, Germany was already crumbling. Allied aircraft bombed submarine plants every day. The hurried, modular assembly of Type 21s led to leaks, electrical problems, and fractured welds. The majority never reached the ocean. Just 2 Type 21 submarines ever undertook a combat mission, and not a single torpedo was launched in combat. The Electroboot was not a weapon. It was a what-if, a final glimpse of what German engineering could have achieved if war had not choked it first. When the conflict at last ceased in 1945, the U-boat fleet did not come back victorious. It crawled home in fragments, broken, pursued, and beaten by a technology most of its crews never fully grasped. Of the 40,000 men who were in the German U-boat service, 30,000 died. Survival rate, 25%, the highest death rate of any branch in World War II. The ones who lived bore the sound of sonar with them for their remaining days. Herbert Werner, formerly a young officer on U-557, was one of just a few commanders whose U-boats made it through the war. He was in a British POW camp for 2 years before emigrating to the United States in 1952. There, in a peaceful Connecticut town, he did the unexpected. He assisted in developing sonar systems. The very same tool that pursued him became his line of work. He was aware of the irony. In 1969, he released Iron Coffins, his chilling memoir of the U-boat war. Its dedication said, "To my fallen comrades who rest in iron coffins at the bottom of the sea." Another who survived, radio operator Wolfgang Hirschfeld, released his war journal years after. In his last entry, penned as Germany fell, he mused on the realization submariners gained too late. "We believed we were invisible. Then came the pings. They stripped the sea of its mercy." For many U-boat veterans, the conflict never really stopped. Cramped in metal graves beneath the ocean, stalked without notice, crushed by pressure and quiet, their combat zone haunted their recollections. Even decades after, when survivors reunited, they always spoke of the same thing. Not torpedoes, not convoy fights, not winning or losing. They discussed the sound, that awful metallic echo that rang through steel hulls and shattered the legend of U-boat invulnerability for good. Ping. The Atlantic conflict was not decided by one weapon, military, or country. It was decided by a technological revolution. When sonar was perfected, the seas were no longer a safe haven. The formerly unseen U-boats that had menaced the oceans were pulled into the open, not by vision, but by sound. Sonar shifted the momentum of World War II. It shielded the supply routes that sustained Britain. It ensured American soldiers reached Europe. It permitted D-Day, and it established a new principle of combat. No weapon remains dominant indefinitely. After 1945, every naval power in the world analyzed what befell the U-boats. The Soviets constructed more silent submarines. NATO developed more powerful sonar. The undersea arms competition that started in WATS persists today in every ocean. The lesson, bought with 30,000 German lives, still reverberates. Invisibility is fleeting. Discovery is unavoidable. Technology is always advancing. The U-boat conflict started with quiet predators hunting the oceans. It concluded with those very hunters hearing, immobilized in the blackness, for the noise that ultimately always located them. Ping.